Hello, and welcome to today's Engineering Harmony talk. So, today I wanted to discuss a little bit this idea of doing less with AI. So, I wrote a bit about today about how the instinct or the narrative and the pull when we talk about AI, when we work with AI, is to do more. That now we can, have this personal assistant, this a team or even army of agents that can go off and do tasks on our behalf. It can research, it can write code, it can build things for us, it can analyze things for us. We can now do a lot more than we used to be able to. You'll often hear people talk about like having an army of interns. And I think even that language of an army of interns, it's always struck me as quite interesting because this idea, first of all, of I guess this idea of like an intern is kind of like this dog's body, this kind of person who you can like boss about and get to do all these kind of like low level menial tasks. Um, has always it's kind of like such a facet of kind of corporate and business life that it kind of gets taken for granted. But I actually um, I even kind of contest the point that that's how we should think about interns. Or like usually when we think about an intern, it's a young person. Maybe it's their first job, it's their first time trialing at an organization, and this idea that they're essentially just like slaves for us, right? We can get them to get our coffees or do all our boring tasks, and of course, as I wrote about today, like some of these tasks that we would get an intern or get AI to do, they can be they can be boring, they can be menial, um, and it's in a way it's we're largely grateful that we can automate things like writing some boring boilerplate code or just kind of updating a basic spreadsheet, that we can now do this far quicker and far kind of more efficiently. um, but there's also value to doing these things that we learn through. And I think in the traditional kind of work path, you started at the bottom and you did all these boring tasks, and in the process you kind of learned the basics, you learned the ropes, so to speak. And you, over time, as you kind of got more confident with that, you kind of were exposed to higher and higher level tasks. And I've written about this a lot in the context of junior engineers, but that this is, with AI, this path is completely destroyed, right? Like there is you this kind of X number of years of just doing the low level stuff until you work your way up to higher level stuff. It doesn't exist as a path anymore because AI, it just does it so much better, so much faster, so much um, cheaper, that it becomes incredibly expensive to kind of pursue that as a way of kind of teaching and helping people learn. And so so what does that mean in terms of kind of doing less then with AI? And I think even in the example of juniors, it's a really interesting one, right? Because actually what I've done with my business, where I work with junior engineers and bring them in and get them to do hands-on tasks for kind of early stage, help early stage startups and small businesses like build the technology that they need. With AI, it actually it gives it forces them, it requires us to move up the stack much faster. So some of the junior engineers, I'm like one of the junior engineers I'm working with at the moment, is having to make trade-off decisions and think about things, and the conversations we have are at a level I would have previously been having with at least a mid-level, if not a senior engineer, right? Because that's the level, how do we architect this? What are the kind of economic trade-offs around kind of implementing it this way or that way? How does this fit into the longer term strategy? We're having that straight away within, he's been working, like he's been paid to write code only for like a few months, right? 6 months or so. And so, but we're having to have that level of conversation very early because AI, it's not about let's go over Node.js syntax anymore. It's really about moving to these higher levels really much faster. And what's exciting for me is the early evidence I found is that that is possible. That it was an uncertain, like, can you learn this stuff way earlier? Do you have to go through that kind of drudgery phase before you get to this? And I think the answer is no. And I guess that comes back to like why I kind of contest this idea of intern or army of interns as this, you know, um, there's no value to an intern. They can't do anything. They have to, apart from these kind of dog's body tasks. And actually, we miss out on like understanding what are the unique things, even as a young person. What are the unique perspectives? What are the unique human traits that they can bring that can enrich what we do, and that we can actually, and like how do we bring out the most of them as quickly as possible, not force them to fit into our system. And this goes back to the root of the actual word education, right? The Latin term education means to draw something out of. So when we talk about educating people, we talk about it's actually about cultivating what's already there and leading and kind of drawing it out of them. It's not about stuffing stuff into them or getting them to fit into a box. Now, this all might seem like a bit of a divergence away from this idea of kind of doing less with AI, but I think it's really important because what even recent studies have shown, I think it's the HBR study, was showing that basically AI intensifies work, right? So for people who are using AI, they're working at higher levels. They don't have to spend as long doing these tedious tasks. But what ends up happening is that therefore the work intensifies. They're operating at this higher level. They're having to think. They're maybe navigating between more and more different things. Previously, maybe a marketer, and now marketers can write a prototype for a particular feature that a client requested, and demo it or try play around with it, and then give that to an engineering team. So the diversity of tasks, the level at which these tasks are operating are much higher, and that's much more intense. And so what is fine is that work is intensifying. And I actually don't think that this is a bad thing in and of itself, in that I think actually, let's consider the opposite. What does like really low intensity work look like? It's usually kind of dull, it's kind of boring. And sure, there might be, oh, great, I can just get paid to do this like really basic thing, but actually it's pretty soul sapping. It's not really engaging with us as kind of human beings, or what lights us up and what makes us, inspired and created. So I think like having more intensity of go, oh, I've got an idea and hey, I'm going to go off and do this. I couldn't do this before as a marketer, go and just build an app, to prototype something. And sure, it's going to strain my I'm now doing lots of different things. I'm much more multifaceted. But I think that this is actually, what we're like as humans. We are all multifaceted. We're not just one thing. We bring lots of different parts of our experience and personality to bear on anything we do. And so being able to do more and at a higher level, it is going to be, it's more intense, it's more, but it's also, I think that's like a positive thing, like that we're actually really engaged and like exploring different things, and ideas are firing and we can pursue them, and we have this higher leverage to do stuff. But of course, with that comes a trade-off, which is when you work more intensely, you need more rest, right? You need working at high intensity without rest, or just continuously, will lead to, if you think about in like a sports contest or physical sports context or physical context, you will, if you overexert yourself continuously, you will injure yourself. You will cause harm, right? And it's the same with this kind of work. I think if you are continuously in this state of intensity, you will burn out. And so this is the kind of interesting paradox of AI, is that it allows us to do more, and certainly this has been and I don't always successfully follow it, but my intention and generally what I try and practice, how do then I do less? Like, as AI can do more, the temptation, the natural inclination is to then I can do more. Like, I can do more, so I've got to do more, and I'll do more, and AI kind of amplifies that. Whereas what if we can ask instead, like, well, if AI can do this stuff, why can't I do less? If AI can do this stuff at a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost, then doesn't that free me up? Can't I now do less? And the most common in my experience, or in my understanding, the most common kind of argument against this, the most common, pushback would be, well, you could, but you're going to be outcompeted, right? You could do that. You can do what you were doing before, and like now you can do it much faster, so you can kind of like bank that time back. But if you don't then expand and do more stuff and do more and more, then you'll be outcompeted by someone who does do that, and and I think that this is really important to consider, and there is some truth to it in that. Um, of course, if I literally did potentially exactly what I did before with no change and didn't evolve and or adapt or anything, I just got AI to do what I was doing before and I kind of left it at that, then yes, I think this would be true, right? But I think what naturally happens is there is undoubtedly, as we give more of the menial tasks to AI and move higher up the stack, we will do more. We're freed up to do more things, and so we naturally will grow and evolve, and and change, right? And thus we so that kind of, yes, if you were just completely doing it the old way, like basically we can start doing things in a new way. So if you're completely in the old way and someone else can do the thing in the old way with AI way faster and way more than you, then yes, you'll get out competed. But if you actually go, well, AI can now do things I was doing the old way, and that frees me up to do things in a new way, then now you're kind of transcending this and you're moving into a slightly different kind of category. And even so, and the other key point when it comes to this competition piece, because I think it's really important, is if you if it's just about doing more, then it's essentially it's a race to the bottom. So if I find I can do more with AI, and now I need to do more. And if I don't stop it, then if someone else can do more as well with AI. So now I'm in a competition with them. I have to do more. They do more. I've got to do more. And you're gonna have this race, right? You have to work harder and harder. It's called like the Red Queen paradox, right? You have to run harder and harder just to stay still, and of course that isn't sustainable, right? And ultimately this working harder, well, what does working harder really mean? Because the outcome is no longer linked to your to kind of time and effort in the way it was. It's about, if AI is doing most of the work and what you're really competing with is actually AI systems competing against each other, you're not going to be up 24 hours a day running all these calculations or doing whatever you might be getting these agentic systems to do. But so it's about the AI. It's about how you leverage AI to achieve these things. If and so then the question is, well, what differentiates how you use AI? Now, I think there's short-term things where, like, in the now, someone who's really experienced with using AI tools. Hey, Diamantino, welcome. If someone's really experienced with using AI tools versus someone who isn't that experienced, then there will be a kind of there could be a there could be a different outcome, right? But I think this is a quite a short-term period. I think that we will we're going to see more and more of these tools become easier to use. And also, Azim Azar kind of wrote about this recently, the kind of difference between like 4K and 8K TVs, right? Where beyond at a certain point, with 4K television, that's kind of like the highest limit of where human sight can see. And beyond that, there's like diminishing returns. So like there's not really many 8K televisions because you just can't tell the difference between a 4K and an 8K television. And that this might be true increasingly with AI models, that at the frontier, at the edge, if you're talking about like math Olympiads and stuff, new frontier models could be really interesting and relevant. But for the general use case of most of the population, it could be true that now or very soon, most of the models that are being produced are actually kind of good enough for anything that we would need them, that the most people would need them for. Unless you're really in the kind of extreme niches, you don't really need this level of capability. Some of the current models or kind of soon coming up models are more than good enough. And so if that's the case, then it becomes much less about, if the agents are really good and you can use them almost as well as someone else, or like that isn't the different, it becomes less and less the differentiator of how well you can use agents. What then is the differentiator? And for me, this comes back to this idea I go on about a lot, which is, AI forces us to focus on what we can do uniquely as humans. And what I come back to is what's going to differentiate these kind of two two AI agentic fleets, right? It's essentially comes down to that's why I think vibe coding took off as such a term. It's like, it's what vibes do we inject into it, and we can be a bit more concrete than that. I think when we talk about vibes, what we're talking about is like vision. So, like, what am I trying to achieve? What do I see in my mind's eye? What am I moving towards? That potentially no one else can see, right? I work with startup founders. Sometimes the visions they have, the ideas, the way they see the world, and the idea, is no one else can see it. Part of their job as founders is to help other people, whether that's investors, whether that's employees, to see what they see and why they're doing what they're doing. And this is really, and that is, this idea that AI can deal with the probable, but only humans can deal with the possible. So we can see things in our vision and our mind's eye that maybe are well without beyond the kind of the bounds of probability, and instead, whereas AI can only it can see within its distributed mean, and it can remix things, but this is not enough for creativity. You actually have to remix things in service of a vision to achieve a purpose. And so all this comes back to, well, if AI is forcing us to do what only humans can do, I think this, and essentially what we can uniquely give is the vibe, right? Is the value, is like, you can have two almost equal agentic systems, AI systems. What's going to differentiate them? Well, it's about what are the human values that that get given to that. And this also, and so that, where do our values come from? Where does our vision come from? It comes from being human. It comes from being embodied. It comes from our lived experience, and it comes from actually connecting more to ourselves. The more we can let go of sort of the external and like following trends, etc. Again, all the great breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs, business breakthroughs, it's very often someone who has an inner conviction, an inner idea of some, and often scientists like Einstein will talk about, that they have visions, right? It's like they see something and they actually have to work backwards. I think, Einstein famously had this dream of riding on a beam of light. And it was from that he was inspired. He then had to go back and work out how to, figure out, I can't remember if it was relativity or if it was the general theory of relativity or special relativity, but I can't remember which way around it was. But this idea that vision precedes the work to then go and figure this out is like very common. And so how do we tap into this inner kind of, and I basically call this intuition, right? Like, it is intuition. How do I follow this inner voice? And that requires going within, right? Taking some, and there's, many spiritual traditions. We all have some experience of this as well. How do we get quiet? What does, what allows me to connect with what nourishes me from within myself? And that could be all sorts of things. It could be meditation. It could be, I practice and teach Tai Chi, but it could also be, it could be going to the sauna. It could be going to the spa day. It could be meeting up with friends. Anything that allows us to connect with ourselves and nourish ourselves, and grow, right? Because also when we kind of work with others as well, they can serve as our mirrors and help us understand ourselves by realizing who we're not and what, where we've got blind spots. And so I think this, being able to connect more deeply with ourselves and with others, is really core to actually to being able to leverage these AI tools well, and also because we can do it sustainably. If AI does intensify work, as the studies show it does, then that means rest and stepping away from these tools becomes even more important, because we want to do this sustainably. And there's a really good book called Ergodicity, just getting it off my bookshelf, by Luca Delana. And shout out to Kent Beck for recommending this to me. And it's a really fascinating book, and there's lots of really interesting things in it. But one of the things I want to highlight, which kind of speaks to some of the ideas he has in there, is this idea that the best skiers are not actually the fastest skiers in the world. if we're talking about like Olympic level, high competitive athletes in terms of skiing, those who are winning the gold medals are not necessarily the fastest skiers in the world. Because if you're the fastest skier in the world and you're going 100% every time and you injure yourself and you break your leg, you are out of the. You can't compete anymore. You're just, that could be essentially your career over. And so when we see these winners, these people winning the gold medals in skiing, of course they're incredibly fast, but they've also had the ability to manage how fast they go. They may not be giving 100% every race, because it's not just a race. It's not just a single race. You have to do this over the course of a career, right? And one of the key, if you break your leg, if you go all out and you injure yourself really badly, it's game over. You can't. That loss eats all future gains. You now no longer have a career anymore. You can't go on and win that gold medal. So while of course it's important to win races if you're competing as a skier, you all have to balance this with the overarching, well, if I want to have a career in this and win bigger and bigger prizes, I actually have to modulate. It's not just about going as fast as I can. We have to sometimes go slower so that we can get to the next race and actually and not just win, but win sustainably, right? And I think this is going to be so crucial with AI, that there is going to be the tendency, and we see this, the 996 culture, and where you work 9 hours a day, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, right? That's what 996 culture is, which is, and look, I can't speak. I'm not involved in that kind of world so much. So, and there may be cases where it's kind of necessary, or what you're doing, and I don't want to kind of denigrate or say that that's bad or wrong. But I do think what you'll see, because we're human, is that is only sustainable for a very short term, and that people will burn out. And that actually, if you want to create value and you want to use AI well and build businesses or whatever, improve your life, it's about doing it sustainably over a long period of time. And so therefore rest, being able to step away from these tools, connect to ourselves, first of all, allows us to do this sustainably, which I think is going to be incredibly important, because these things compound and they take time. Compound interest, when things compound, it starts off small, but compounding interest gets really, really big, but it takes time to get there, right? So you have to be able to stay alive long enough. You have to be able to do this sustainably enough to actually make it to the point where you realize these gains. So stepping away, I think, from AI both allows us to do it sustainably, which I think is important if we're serious about really delivering change and value, whatever that means to you. That could be making money, that could be having an impact on the world, that could be supporting your friends and family, whatever that value means to you. If you want to use AI to deliver more value to the world, then doing so sustainably is undoubtedly the best way to do that. And I also believe that by stepping away and connecting more with ourselves, we can actually use AI far more effectively, because it's just that, I use the metaphor of, a dinghy going in the right direction will always be a speedboat going in the wrong direction, right? And so you might have a speedboat with AI, but if you're not pointing in the right direction, what's the point? You're just going the wrong place way faster. And so actually taking time to step away, connect to yourself, and orient, well, what's important to me? Why is this important? What do I care about? What am I trying to achieve? And really approaching, with a sense of alignment with essentially like good vibes, like with your own unique vibes. I think you're going to get far better outputs and outcomes than simply just doing more and more and more and kind of running in that Red Queen race. Cool. I want to come to a comment from Diamantino. So I'll read it out. It's interesting because AI shows something to us, which makes me think, why do we need something to let us, I guess, know who we are, especially when there's no intelligence in these models? Or maybe we're searching for some healing, or our society is probably not suitable for us. Everything seems to be rushing. Yeah, so I saw a really interesting article the other day. I can't remember exactly how to frame it, but it was talking about how, obviously AI runs on silicon, right? And silicon is like it's in a sense quite similar to glass, right? It's kind of derived from the same kind of chemical, elemental compounds. And so ultimately, like AI is like the ultimate mirror, is the point it was trying to make. Like, this is ultimate in reflection. And I, I, I definitely think that I agree that AI is showing something to us. I think we all like, which makes me think, why do we need that? It's like we've always needed that. We always need an other, something outside of us to help us understand ourselves. Um, and every there was a meme I've shared in one of my posts where it was like, the invention of the book. It's like, whoa, the whole universe, or like the invention of the wheel. Wow, the whole universe is a wheel, like cycling round and round. The invention of the book. The universe is like a book, and God spoke the first word, and that's how things came into existence. And then we invented clockwork mechanisms. The whole universe is a clockwork mechanism, and then it's like, computers get invented. Whoa, the whole world is a computer simulation. So I think it's part of who we are as humans, that we do need to look outside of ourselves to help us understand ourselves and see ourselves reflected back. We can't, there's the saying, you can't read the label from the inside of the jar, right? We need some element of being able to put ourselves out there and then be able to see ourselves as distinct from ourselves to understand that. And yes, in terms of, I think, and especially the point around there's no intelligence in these. I mean, they're nothing but intelligence in my mind. That's all they are. Whether they have anything more than that, like consciousness, or what I would like, things like intuition, these other things, I would keep it as an open question. It's very hard to. I do think these are ultimate mirrors, and so it's incredibly difficult not to anthropomorphize them, and to read kind of things into them that we want to see. So I think for me the question is still out as to whether these things have consciousness, whether they could be considered consciousness of their own types. I'm actually not dismissive of that idea. I think consciousness is a spectrum. I think there's all sorts of different consciousnesses around. We're aware of like animal consciousnesses, human consciousnesses, and of course they all look different. But it's not to say that do I think that machine or a silicon consciousness is impossible? No, not at all. So that's just my perspective. I'm I'm making no absolute claims here. But your last point around maybe we're searching for some healing, 100%, we definitely are. And I think this comes back to, AI forcing us to do what only humans can do. That can sound negative, but I think it's also an incredibly positive thing. I think so much of society, so much of what work looks like, what how our lives are actually very inhumane. They are not cultivated. They're not designed or haven't evolved in a way that is actually conducive or encouraging of human flourishing. And that's why, as you said, everything seems to be rushing. I think this idea of AI as a mirror, where it's actually showing us our blind spots and showing us, well, if all we want is more, 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 then we can use AI to do more, 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 more. But we will reach the natural endpoint of that way quicker than we otherwise would have, which is burnout, collapse, over consumption of resources, of our own resources, of the earth's resources. I think it's showing, if that's and it comes back to this idea of like the vibe thing, like if that's our vibe going into it, then it will amplify that, but also show us the limits of that vibe very quickly. And so that's why for me, slowing down, doing less with AI, tapping more into what is nourishing for me, what's important for me, and why am I doing what I'm doing, actually allows me to then use, I can then use AI as a tool to help me achieve those things. And a big part of my work as a fractional CTO is I'm very explicit. I don't work according to time. I work according to what outcomes are you looking for. I will deliver those outcomes for a fixed price, but I'm not going to say I'm going to spend X number of hours to achieve that outcome. I will deliver it, but it's up to me to figure out how long it'll take. And if I can use AI to do it faster, I will. If I have to learn something and it takes me longer, I will. That's not on me and not you, as it should be. And so I think it's really important we do change our way of thinking about, all sorts of things, but the most obvious one is work, right? Like, how do we approach work? This is probably one of the main ways we use AI at the moment, and especially when we talk about kind of burnout, that's where it's occurring. So I think it's so important to figure out how it's easy to do more with AI. So the real question is, how do we do less? How do I actually let go of more things and focus in more and more deeply and specifically on what is, what lights me up, what is unique to me, or what uniquely interests me. And that's a process, right? It's not a one thing I decide. There's a continual process and learning and evolution. But I guess the key message I wanted to communicate in this talk is this, excuse me, is this idea that if we can step back and do less, I think we'll actually achieve far more. I think we'll actually have far better outcomes. And it's so important to think about, how do I do less, and if I can, and then from that perspective, only then think about, well, how can AI help me do that. I think that's the way around. If we simply looking to think about how we can do more with AI, looking at this technology, thinking everyone's doing more, it can do more, I must do more, then I think we're kind of losing ourselves. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you, Diamantino, for joining, and anyone else watching back. And would love to hear if this kind of resonated for you, if you have any thoughts or questions. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all and hearing from you in the future. All right. Thanks, everyone.